Welcome to the Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look basically at the 5 burning climate issues, which are basically scheduled for discussion at the 2022 UN General Assembly. And they've got really not much to talk about, have they? They haven't really saying, yes, we've made lots of progress on this, that, and the other. What they're coming back to is 5 burning issues which need to be solved.
Yeah, so back in January of this year, of course, the general secretary, he was talking about what we need to work on, and for the year, basically, 'cause they do 2 sessions every year. And so so last year he was talking or beginning of this year he was talking about the COVID battle, because that was getting there, but that's near enough science has been going through. Uh, he was talking about reforms to global finance, but basically he was saying it's morally bankrupt. Not necessarily untrue. And countries needed to support more green transition and things. And there was some other things, sort of like cyberspace technology. Like we need to. Anyway, so that's what he said in January, and basically he's moved on from, I say, that, in regards to, this is now the first time they're meeting again, and basically he sort of gone and said, well, climate change has been put on a back burner again, and he's not really happy with that and wants it to be, I wouldn't say push forward, but we need to work on this.
Well, it's got to be made more urgent, hasn't it? This is the whole point, that we're looking at global warming. It's not something that's going to happen. It is happening. We're seeing it all this summer with the big floods in India. And Pakistan, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing the high temperatures in, well, just about everywhere. Even in the UK, we celebrated, and that's not the right word either, 40 Celsius. So global warming really is here, and it's here to stay. And somebody's got to make some decisions to do something. When the General Secretary stood up and had a sort of a nice intro at the meeting, he basically said, let's see if we can tax all the polluters.
Yes.
Worldwide.
Yeah, it wasn't sort of a simple sort of, let's work on let's do something small. No, he really just openly said we need to sort of get the profits, because all these fossil fuel companies are making absolute bucket loads of cash, and the answer is, the solution which he presented was a very simple one. They're making the bucket load of cash. Let's take their bucket load of cash and use that to save the world. Yeah, effectively, he wants to do some windfall
Taxation.
on their profits. Yeah, it's one of those things where he wasn't actually asking for a windfall tax outright. He was just more saying, hey, we need to basically curb in these energy companies' profits, so they can either, if they're not willing to spend on, say, the going green, then let's take that money and put it into going green. That's essentially what he was putting on and referring to.
And that's what our government's actually looking at. We've said we're not going to tax these companies. We're not going to have this big windfall tax, but we are trying to encourage them to try and spend a lot of their extra profits on renewables. And I think there's somewhere there's going to be a little, and if you don't, but we don't know that one
yet. No, it's one of those things where the General Secretary was talking about sort of introducing these windfall taxes, but he wasn't actually saying for windfall taxes, because of course windfall taxes don't quite work in really how everybody thinks they work. They think, of course, it's taxing after when they make profits, and you tax on that profit. So that's fine and great. But of course, most companies don't aim to make a profit. they tend to be, because of course, any profits they do make, they then give it back to their shareholders. So it's one of those things where the shareholders are actually the ones extracting the money out of the company, as opposed to the energy company. Now, I'm not saying the energy company aren't.
Well, the energy companies are making a lot of money because of this illegal action by Russia on Ukraine, which is now further escalating, and we worry what's going to happen there in the next couple of weeks. So that sort of put the pressure on the price of gas and oil, and that's what's driven all the prices up, and that's what's keeping Putin's sort of war machine going.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where things need to be looked at, which goes into the next sort of one of the issues he was talking about, is that he wants, I wouldn't say global finance to be reformed. That's the wrong way to put it, but he does talk about how the global finance system is, I say in January he's talking about how it's morally corrupt. This time, it's more the fact that sort of he wants to not change or reform it. That's the what he does want to reform the financial, but he wants actually to be remade. He said it's not working. We need to start all over again. And one of the more important things, of course, is the funding for, I say not for poorer countries, but for more heavily climate affected countries. We're talking about sort of for Pakistan and the floods. If they had better flood defense, would they have flooded as much? And the answer is, well, who knows? But Pakistan didn't.
But the logic says they should be better off. If they've got adequate flood defences, then a big flood happens and they're not too bad. But all around there, they've got a lot of low-lying land. Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan all have problems in the sort of monsoon sort of region. When they're going to get this, they know they're going to get this terrific amount of water, and they've got to be able to sort of cope with it adequately. And that means spending a lot of money. But if you're Pakistan, what are you going to spend money on? Are you trying to spend money on sorting out the immediate problem of homeless people and all those problems? Or are you trying to sort of spend that money on flood defences? And unfortunately, the answer is they've got to do both.
Yeah, so one of the major things they're talking about is as you say, lots of countries who have had aid money, they sort of, it doesn't go anywhere, or it doesn't seem to go. As I said, the critical thing is, of course, is the fact that sort of Pakistan was receiving money to build flood defences, except it never did build flood defences with that money. And admittedly, they did say they didn't get around to it. It was all a plan and allocated. It wasn't sort of, we just didn't, we spent the money elsewhere. So they hadn't actually spent the money to do anything.
But this is the basic problem. This is what the General Secretary is moaning at. Countries are sort of not putting climate change first. We've got to basically do what he said, which was champion more clean energy, which is the next major thing that they've got to try and do. We've got to try and not solve our European gas problem from Russia with just finding different sources of gas and buying it from somewhere else, but it's going and making more wind energy, more solar energy, start tidal energy, start wave energy, and more. And I don't like nuclear energy, but nuclear is not basically sort of a CO2 producer. And I can see that one as a temporary sort of thing on the way, not being too bad a choice. You don't have to use uranium reactors. They can actually pioneer and work on the thorium reactors, which could be more effective because, well, there's more thorium around than there is uranium. But it's getting people going. It is this idea of championing more clean energy.
Yes, so one of the major things, of course, is, you know, in relation back to the gas price, or, how everybody's transitioning away from gas because of the price. But of course, all we're doing now is that Europe is dashing for gas in Africa and Australia, or the Oceania, and the answer is it's not quite the point. The idea is to move away from gas, not just get your gas from somewhere else. Where better to do it.
And I was just interrupting to say, and if they go and use electricity instead, that's all right, as long as it's made renewably. If they're using gas to make it, then this is sort of one of these sort of ever distending spirals, isn't it?
Yes, and that's the problem. It was one of those things where loads of countries are seeing and reporting that they're getting more activating more coal plants to help feed this energy because they've got this constant need, and that people are saying don't go for coal. You need to go for the gas turbines, and people are saying, yeah, but look at the gas price. Coal is cheap. And the reason coal is cheap is because no one's burning it. It's one of those chicken and the egg sort of scenarios. But in relation to the needing to go for people trying to push gas, is because it does burn a lot cleaner.
But it still makes CO2. And this is our problem with climate change. We're trying to cut down on the CO2. All right, I'll agree that burning gas is going to be a lot better than burning coal. We're not putting up anything like as much other pollution causing more climate change. But they'd do much better if they invested that money rather than in sort of coal, in renewables. And they are, but they're not doing enough. This is, I think, the point, isn't it?
Well, it is the thing that sort of, as I say, people are putting money into these things, except the problem is, it's easy to build a gas turbine than it is to build a wind power turbine, because, of course, gas turbine you can build anywhere, but a wind turbine, you've actually got to work out where it's windy to extract the wind. And this is one of the major problems in they were talking about in Africa, you see. There isn't actually much wind in the middle of Africa because, of course, that's where the wind's been generated. That's because they're on the equator, you see. That's one of the major issues. You see, there's not much wind there because, of course, all it's doing is it's going up and then
Yeah.
So it's where do they put their wind turbines when there's no wind?
But they can use more solar because places like nearer the equator do get generally more sunshine, so they can do that. And they have to then, if they're not going to use wind, they've got to use other means of generating power, which can be just from rivers, or it can be, because we know they have a lot of droughts there, it can be perhaps even using nuclear. And unfortunately, most of Africa isn't nuclear. Oh, you mustn't have this because you could develop weapons. Well, maybe we have to think differently on that if we're going to try and create more sort of climate friendly world.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where sort of it's the negotiations are ongoing in relation to the UK's been talking to South Africa and Vietnam as sort of about them going from coal to gas. We know that US and Japan are talking to Indonesia and those countries, and of course it is Germany's talking to India, and of course France is talking to Senegal. It's all these relationships and talks about people trying to get them on board with growing for gas, but then because of course all the crisis happened, everybody's pulling away from gas, saying I can't afford that, which is honest and quite true. People, they don't have the financing to do so, but it's in relation to all the big companies, they've got the money. Well, can't we not take it from them? And then suddenly these smaller countries do have the money because we've got the investment available. It's sort of this, as you say, not a downward spiral, but you can sort of see it's very cyclic in the arguments and the relations of we need more money to be put into more clean energy, and that clean energy reduces the bill, so then the country's got more money to invest in. It does start.
It does make well, in theory, a circle, but you and I both know that's usually a spiral, and it's going down. All right, let's have a look at the next one then. So we've got to try funding for the world's most climate vulnerable countries. And that's where countries like the UK and Germany, we're saying, well, we're sorting out our own problems. We've got big problems. We're trying to sort those out. We're spending a lot of money, a lot of investment on renewables. Yeah, but how about the other people? You know, it isn't just that we created this problem, but basically, this is our only world. It's only going to work if we help everybody and everybody helps each other. And countries basically don't like doing this.
Well, it's one of those odd things that sort of, why should the UK invest in, I say Senegal for going back to it? And the answer is, well, not. However, of course, climate change isn't a single country's, I say, fault or problem. Let's talk about the large droughts. You look at the world over, there's been droughts. So, the world has been affected. Therefore, the world should work together and sort of, it's, one of those clauses for globalization in regards to the fact that sort of, the small countries, these vulnerable countries in relation to climate, a big uh, people, countries who got the financing and the finance to actually, you know, let's say Senegal was removed completely off the map. Would that be a shame? Whose fault is that? It's one of those odd things where is that a problem for the UN to sort of work out, which is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's one of those things where out of the global, it wasn't say Japan throwing Senegal under the bus. It was just Senegal just went under. And so, is that a problem? Should we let Senegal go under? And the answer is, as a global community, it's we probably shouldn't. We should probably strive to keep Senegal alive. The faux pas of Senegal's still around. But it is the sort of thing that these countries who are having much, severe problems, having to basically is, not the cost of, cost prevention of climate damage and climate things is much better than not the repatriations, but of course the repair, the sort of, or the recovery time of sort of from these, like I say, climate disasters, these climate things. You think suddenly that a country can lose its they're here 3.7% of their average GDP after a cyclone hits. For a small country who's, let's say, they've only got five GDP, and suddenly they've lost three. That's huge in relation to the proportion of their GDP lost just to one cyclone. So of course, they spend their time building back up that five, or three GDP for another cyclone to come through and wipe that out, and sort of saying, well, that's not quite working in relation to, surely they should have some resilience, but they can't build resilience because they're always constantly fighting against these current cyclones. And so they need outside money and sourcing to actually help fix or to help make everything sturdy, their economy sturdy, to make their GDP a bit better, or,
But this is where big countries don't necessarily want to try and help smaller countries. And this is a problem. They don't want to help because, I want to look after myself and I want to sort of, well, we're struggling with our money and we don't really want to, we can't afford to. And, well, I think it's really a case of, can we afford not to? Countries are borrowing money to try and sort of keep themselves afloat after all the COVID problems. And they're saying, yeah, well, we can't afford to do this sort of thing at the moment. And I think it is, we can't afford not to.
yes, absolutely. And that in regards to trying to do that is that sort of, it's the climate targets, this is sort of the 1.5 degrees in relation to keeping the 1.5 alive. Without these things, if they're having to not fight climate, they're having to rebuild. You see, they're not fighting their, climate, which is a major problem. But of course, is it right that they haven't made these targets because, of course, they can't make the targets? Yes, they can say we'll reduce emissions by 5%. Wonderful and great, but sort of how long is it them taking to reduce that 5% anyway? It's one of those things where, as you know, even some of the bigger countries now, we're talking things like Russia, China. I know India's not been very good in their climate targets.
Australia?
Well, Australia's slightly got better in relation to they've made some targets now.
Yeah, they haven't done anything.
They
haven't made them. Yes,
they now have made some targets. So yeah, but of course, from COP26, you see, work has been made of them, and suddenly, I think India said they actually made some targets. They all revised some targets. Very recently.
But we've got COP27 arriving soon, and you have to think about, well, what's actually happened since COP26, and the answer is, well, I suppose if you make a few decisions to do a few things, it might help. But I was reading, and I blogged about Southern Australia, wasn't it? South Australia. They have now got a renewable electricity grid.
Yeah, so in relation to that, you see, with their targets, you see, they made this proud declaration that, of course, in the next 5 years, their grid was going to go 100% renewable power, as in not needing, I say, power from other fossil fuels, importing from different. And so the whole state was going to be powered by 100% renewable. And that was great. And that's one of those things where it's fabulous to hear and see, and that's part of the target. You see, then they're now saying, look at how much emissions we're now not emitting, and it's one of those great things. And sort of you can say, great,
it's very good, isn't it? Apart from the fact that they haven't curbed really much of their coal production, so they're still digging up a large amount of coal which they're exporting. So I give with one hand and I taketh away with the other hand.
Yeah, so what can you do? The answer is, it's fortunately, but it is a sort of, they've been trying to do this as a project to sort of say, can they do it? It's like the UK for, I think it's something daft like COP, but I think it's a bit more at all. The UK was run 100% on renewables. Admittedly, that was because some of the gas turbines were turned off for maintenance, but we did run off 100% renewables for a couple of days.
And China did the same with the Olympic Games, didn't they?
Yes.
They managed to run the Olympic Games on renewables. They're good. They're great sort of headline catchers. But can you not say, right, we can run so much of the country on renewables, 40%, and then we're going to go to 50%, then 60%, and so on, and set better targets and actually do things. Now, the last major item, I think, on their UN list is making a legal obligation to protect people from climate harm. Now, this sounds quite a sort of a interesting one. This is about Vanuatu, isn't it? Which is the island country off in the South Pacific, which is basically sinking. And they're trying to sort of basically gather lots of support from the international sort of community, the court, International Court of Justice, basically to make sort of it a legal obligation to make sure that nobody comes to any harm.
Yes, what they want to do. So as the UN makes and sort of say, there are these UN basic human rights. These are things like people need access to water, shelter. I think it's electricity, access to the internet. It's a whole, and what Vanuatu wants to do in relation to
Vanuatu.
I said vanity.
All right.
Right. Is that they want to basically inside that legal precedent is the countries who obviously who fall must have legal obligations to protect their people from climate harm or climate damage, and that's not necessarily in relation to it's a cyclone going through once in a lifetime. You could protect your people from that single cyclone. It is doing the sort of you know if they're not putting in the flood defense to protect them, that's then causing problems that way.
Well,
And
we've got Pakistan. They're also leading the charge here, aren't they? Saying that most of this flood that hit sort of Pakistan, it was due to climate change, and countries need to make reparations for that. So they're trying to sort of bring in that one as well. Trying to force it is sort of what they're trying to do, I suppose, in this international court. But then, how many countries are actually going to listen to that and do something about it?
well, yes, it's one of those things where, of course, they've got to sign on to this, and sort of and add it as a legal obligations for the as in the basic needs and rights. And it depends whether they actually go for it. Yeah, it's one of the things where there is some problems with it. Of course, what do you mean by climate harm? Is it sort of the once in a lifetime thing? But is it sort of things like, let's say the crops dying out with drought, should people get some money for that? There are some legal questions that need to be answered. So they're not trying to answer them now. They're basically trying to introduce this thing so they can talk about it, and so they can talk about it at COP26. That's the whole motion of events going forward. But of course, you need to start somewhere. And as you say, they're basically trying to not change environmental laws, but they're trying to actually write some and sort of get some key protections in, and saying that sort of a government need to do this, they need to,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things where if you're not a government or you are a government and you don't do this, what's what's the problem? This is the whole crux about the human rights. It's sort of like, yes, we've got these basic human rights, and then they're violators of these basic human rights, and there's no punishment for breaking these basic human rights or violating them.
Yeah, it comes down to money, though, really. It's, countries are being asked to sort of make reparations. They are being asked, the wealthy countries who've made all their money from sort of energy and pollution, can you help these other countries? And they're going, well, we've got our own problems. Yeah, but it's not as bad. If it were other countries, European countries were sinking, then they do something. Countries like Holland, they have done something to stop them sinking. They've put in terrific flood defenses and they're fairly secure. Maybe other countries need that same sort of help. And it's deciding who's going to pay. And everyone's all right talking about it. They all say, yes, somebody ought to pay, somebody ought to pay. Oh, no, not me.
Yeah, and that's the crux of the whole problem in relation to, there needs to be this sort of mechanism for financial money, or the financial system for repatriations, and it is a problem in regards to the fact that they're not willing, no one's willing to commit to money because, of course, well, we're not the ones, have suffering it, nor are the we ones calling it. Why should we pay? We're paying out all this money anyway. You sort of, why should you ask for even more from us? We can barely afford the stuff we're paying into. And there's the argument in relation to all these things.
Well, these things hit the news and they stay in people's minds for a little while and then they go away. The floods in Pakistan have receded, so it doesn't hit the news. But the devastation is still there, and countries need to basically think about helping. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, looking at basically the 5 burning climate issues that are being discussed by the UN General Assembly, and we can only hope they come up with some good answers. And so until next week, when maybe we might find out some of those answers, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.